From the College of Social Work. She's worked in a variety of settings within the field and is very passionate about issues concerning facing older adults and their caregivers, especially as it relates to Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Tanya's career experience includes positions in the aging and long-term care industry with Senior Action and HCR, Manor Care, Program Management with the Greenville Literacy Association, and Military and Veteran Services. Did I do that okay? Okay. And that was at the American Red Cross. And she's currently works for the Alzheimer's Association, the South Carolina chapter, providing care, consultation, information, and referral services in community and caregiving education, which is what you're doing for us. So we appreciate it. And thanks so much. Looking forward to hearing you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you spending your time with me on one of the most gorgeous days we have had in quite some time. So we're going to be talking for the next hour in our third session in this series about understanding and responding to dementia-related behaviors. And this is going to be a little bit interactive. I am going to be asking questions throughout the presentation. I understand I am being filmed, and I'm going to try to keep my roaming to a minimum, but I usually am a walker and a talker, so if I move around a little bit, just let me know if you have trouble hearing me, all right? So let's jump right into our material for this afternoon. And I'm going to start walking, I think, already now. Away from this. By the end of today's program, you're going to be able to identify some of the common triggers for behaviors associated with dementia. And we're going to look at a process for really assessing and identifying those behaviors and possibly understanding more about why those behaviors are happening. And then we'll look at some strategies to help you address some of those common behaviors. And some of the things that we'll be looking at are anxiety and agitation, wandering, repetitive questions, things like that, and confusion and suspicion. So we're going to delve into those behaviors more in depth before the end of today. All right? All right, so with dementia and Alzheimer's, a lot of the behavioral changes that you see do have a lot of triggers, okay, that are really fueling those behaviors. Pain or discomfort is one of the most common triggers for behaviors. And as you probably learned throughout the other two sessions, the basics and then effective communications, as a person's verbal abilities and cognitive abilities are beginning to decline, and they are not able to express or fully verbally communicate what they are thinking, feeling, wanting, or needing, you might start to see a lot of those wants and needs communicated through behavior, all right? So you can imagine if someone is in pain or discomfort and they are losing that ability to communicate that verbally, that's going to come out in their behavior, all right? So that's one of the first things to really understand is when we're talking about dementia-related behaviors, that's a form of communication. Okay, especially as people start to move into the middle and later stages of the disease, all right? Some of the other triggers for those behaviors, overstimulation or boredom, and we'll talk about that in a little more depth here in just a moment. Fear or frustration. You can imagine, for a moment if, someone with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia is in a care facility, for instance, where there's a lot of things happening at once around them, new faces, new things happening all throughout the day, that could create some fear or frustration. And if they're not able to really communicate that verbally, that may start to play out in their behavior, okay? Unfamiliar surroundings. Okay, so, if you're caring for a loved one who has dementia or Alzheimer's and, you're having to take them with you, places in the community, you really have to be strategic about timing those things and kind of your approach to that, because unfamiliar surroundings can oftentimes trigger some of those behaviors that we're going to talk about. And then complicated tasks. As people, progress through the disease, it becomes harder and harder to sequence through the steps of doing things. Very familiar things like getting up and getting dressed every day. If you think about all the things that you had to do to get up today, get dressed, get where you were going, eat breakfast, get in your car, drive where you were going, think about how you were going to move throughout your day, that's a lot that you have to remember and sequence through, okay? And if you are having difficulty remembering how to sequence through that, it can be very frustrating, all right? So, if tasks become increasingly more complicated, you could see folks starting to communicate that to you through their behavior, okay? And in the effective communications program that you had last Sunday, I'm sure that Jamie talked a lot about limiting the choices, okay? So instead of saying, what do you want to eat for breakfast this morning, or what do you want to wear today, presenting two choices, okay, so that you're limiting that, and it makes those tasks a lot easier for the person to manage, okay? All right, so this is really our 4-step process that we're going to go through as we talk through some of the behaviors today. So the first thing that we talk about when we're addressing a particular behavior, we want to really understand what is happening, what's fueling the behavior. So we talk about detecting and connecting, all right? So first you have to detect what the behavior is and what is happening around the person. So this is kind of the who, what, where, when, how, okay, of what is happening. What time of day is it happening? What's happening immediately before or after the behavior? Who is present, all right? What's the activity that you're trying to do? Different things like that, and really trying to uncover what, things that are happening in the environment around that person may be fueling it. And then connecting with the person, all right? So if someone is becoming increasingly agitated, all right, how many of you, I assume a lot of you are caring for someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's currently. So sundowning is probably not a new concept for a lot of you. And that typically is, for folks, who have dementia or Alzheimer's, toward the, latter part of the day, typically between 4 to, say, maybe 8, 9 p.m., there can be an increase in behaviors, all right, or the need to communicate things through behavior, all right? So oftentimes you might see a lot of frustration or agitation that begins, around that sundown time, all right? And if you think about it, if we want to really look at it and detect and connect what might be happening, a lot of things, especially if you're caring for somebody at home, all right? If you, the caregiver, are with that person and you're the only individual with that person during the day, you can kind of manage things, all right? But if you have a spouse, okay, who comes home from work during that time period, if you have children who are coming home from school, okay, that's an increase in the activity within the household, okay? Noise level probably goes up, television goes on, preparation for dinner, pets probably start to get a little bit more active, so you've kind of lost control of the environment a little bit, okay? So you have to kind of look at what's happening, okay, around that particular behavior. So those are just some things to mention specifically about sundowning, is to kind of look at what's the increase in activity, that's starting to happen that might be fueling that behavior. And then really connecting with the person, okay? So whether you're doing that through, direct eye contact and verbal communication, or through touch, making sure that you're, letting them know that you're there for them and you're trying to understand, what it is they're trying to communicate to you through their behavior. The second step in our 4-step process is to address physical needs. All right, so we really need to, think about, are there any things physically or medically that might be fueling that behavior? Are they sick? Are they showing symptoms of becoming sick? What's one of the most common things that some of you are probably familiar with that can create a change in behaviors in someone with dementia or Alzheimer's? Does anybody know? It's an infection, it's a common one. UTI, okay, urinary tract infection, all right? That can create an increase in some of the behaviors that we are talking about here. And one of the things that's, kind of difficult with that is that with some of those common infections like urinary tract infections or kidney infections or even illnesses like the flu, the symptoms may not present exactly the same in an individual who has dementia or Alzheimer's. So you kind of have to put on a detective hat. And if there's a sharp increase or change in behaviors, one of the first things you might need to do is pay a visit to the doctor, okay, to get some simple blood work done to see if there is something medical that's underlying, and really fueling that particular behavior. So you definitely want to make sure that you're looking at those physical needs or medical needs like that. Other things to think about are, what about environmental issues that might be happening? I think I mentioned before the program, some of you might have heard me, this light right here, it's really bright, okay? And if I'm a person who has dementia or Alzheimer's and I'm not able to communicate that, okay, how am I going to let somebody know that something like that is bothering me? Okay? What if the lighting's too bright or it's too dim? Okay, and I can't communicate that to you. What if it's too hot or too cold and I'm not able to tell you that? All right, that might start to come out in my behavior. Noise level is another thing. If things are too noisy, and we mentioned that with sundowning, that sometimes there can be an increase in the activity and the noise level that starts to happen. So, if you're not able to communicate that, it can be very hard sometimes to understand, what's fueling that behavior. So again, we have to put on our detective hats and really start looking at what's going on around the behavior, okay, that could be fueling it. Then looking at the third step is addressing emotional needs, all right? So what is the person likely feeling, okay? Are you hearing signs of fear, okay? Or, oftentimes, when folks, are prone to wandering, they may, say repetitive things like, I want to go home, I want to go home, okay? And oftentimes, there's an emotion or a feeling behind that, because home to them represents something that's safe, okay? There may have been people there who loved them, okay? They might be, in a situation where they feel fearful and they're wanting to return to a time where they felt safe and loved. So you really have to, look at the feelings sometimes instead of the facts, okay? And think about what it is that, they might be feeling at that particular point in time, all right? And then the final step is to reassess and plan for the next time. And one of the things that I wanted to mention, especially in regards to behaviors, they can be challenging, okay? Dealing with some of the behaviors, it can be challenging and unpredictable at times. And, oftentimes as caregivers, and I say this, I'm a caregiver myself, is that we want a checklist. Okay, we want a menu of things that we can do, okay, to, address a certain behavior. But just as behaviors are very different and unpredictable, people are very different and unpredictable. So is the environment that the person is living in. So what we have to do is a lot of trial and error, all right? And we have to employ these 4 steps to try to understand what might be causing the behavior, and then have some things in our toolbox that we can pull out, all right, to, help address that particular behavior. And then reassess, did it work? Okay, is this something that will likely work again, all right? It may work for a while, and then you might find that it doesn't, and you might have to, figure out I see some heads nodding and folks shaking their heads, that you might have to try different things and to have some different methods or strategies in your arsenal that you can pull out, all right? All right, so let's just look at these a little bit more in depth. So detecting and connecting. How many of you have heard the expression, join the person in his or her reality? Okay, you may have heard that in the last session on effective communication. A person with dementia or Alzheimer's, their reality oftentimes is very different than ours. okay? They may have moments of clarity and be, cognitively astute and aware, but then, if the sky is purple, the sky is purple, okay? Arguing or trying to, convince them that it's not is not really going to get you anywhere, all right? So you really have to join them in their reality. If they are wanting to go home, okay, which again is a common thing that we typically see, sometimes, joining them in that reality and starting to ask them questions about home. What was home like? Who was there? Where did you live? And kind of try to, divert their attention and kind of get them distracted, talking about what that experience was like for them, okay? Understanding, again, the who, what, when, where, how of the behavior is really important. And then always approaching the person calmly, okay? And this is something that we counsel, a lot of caregivers on. It can be very frustrating to deal with the same behaviors repeatedly, okay? So, we do a lot of caregiver education on caregiver stress, okay, and ways to manage the stress of, dealing with behaviors day in and day out, and how stressful those can be, and ways to, approach the person, more calmly and patiently is really important. All right, we talked about some of the physical needs, medical issues. Hunger or thirst was one that I did not mention. But that could definitely be something that could be fueling behavior. And, one simple way, around that is to kind of institute a little schedule, okay, to make sure that, they're drinking enough, all right, and that they're having, enough snacks or nutrition, throughout the day, all right. Lack of social interaction. We talked about overstimulation or boredom can oftentimes fuel behaviors as well. So, making sure that the person is engaged in some way, all right, is really important. And then we talked about some of those other environmental triggers, hot, cold, that kind of thing. All right, so let's listen to Dr. Fazio. Uh-oh. You ready? Okay.
It's important to address the physical needs of a person with Alzheimer's because we should really see if there's something going on that might be causing some pain or discomfort that's causing the person to act a certain way. Like, for example, it could be as simple as maybe the person's shoe is on wrong and it's causing pain in their foot, and by adjusting the shoe would sort of get rid of that frustration and make them walk better. Or it could be something more serious like a urinary tract infection that's causing some problems. So it's important to check that out, whether it be something you can do yourself or something that you should go see a doctor about.
One of the things that I heard recently in a presentation, I feel like I'm ignoring this side of the room, so I'm going to move over this way, is to think about things as simple as, how a person is used to getting dressed every day. Okay? We all have certain ways that we do that. Okay? So like some of you that have socks and shoes on, do you put one sock and one shoe on first? Or do you put both socks on and then both shoes on at the same time? Which leg do you put into your pants first? Those kinds of things that we're used to doing a certain way. Once I know some people chuckle when I talk about that, but it can be very frustrating. I know you don't. Those are the kinds of things that you don't think about, but that could be very frustrating if someone is struggling and trying to do things for themselves, all right? And, suddenly you're wanting them to do it a different way than the way that they have always done it, okay? So, paying attention to those kinds of things is important, right? All right, so addressing some of the emotional needs, we talked about this, focusing on the feelings and not the facts, all right? So what is the person feeling when they're exhibiting this particular behavior, all right? And we'll look at some of those in just a few minutes. Using your knowledge of the person, okay, their likes and dislikes, the things that they typically find soothing or comforting, and really using those, in your arsenal to help deal with some of those behaviors. And then redirecting energy into something that is more soothing. You'll hear the term distraction, redirection, those types of things a lot when you're talking about, dealing with dementia-related behaviors. And learning those things that are more likely to divert the person's attention, okay? Especially if it's a situation where they're very frustrated about something. So having things that you can readily use to redirect their attention becomes very important.
She was part of the family, she'd fold towels, and she'd fold towels all day long some days. Just, put them back in the basket, and then she'd give them to her, here's some more towels. And it may sound like it's cruel, but look, it kept her busy, it kept her movements going, it kept her, just kept her occupied, and it made her feel wanted and that she was contributing. We created a routine for her that worked for her around her agitation and, her sleep patterns. So every day she was in the same routine for the most part. And every day she did something. She was always in the kitchen every day helping do something. Sometimes she'd rinse dishes. But she was always near the kitchen sink because she spent most of her life in front of the kitchen sink. Now she's just doing it in different ways. And going for a walk, going out in the car for a drive, walking around the yard, watering the plants. Those are all things that she did, and we just had her continue doing them.
Okay, so you can see those kinds of things are really important. So, looking at what the person's abilities are and keeping them engaged in doing what they can do is really important. It didn't matter that she folded the same basket of towels 5 or 6 times a day, all right? Because every time she did it, it was new for her, all right? So, incorporating those types of things. Sometimes for folks who are very restless or agitated, handing them an object, whether it's a pot holder in the kitchen and say, here, hold this for me, okay? And it gives them something to focus on, all right? And then if they start to become, agitated again, hand them something else. Hand them a wooden spoon. Here, can you hold this for me? Gives them something to focus that energy into, all right? You might have to keep changing the object, but it gives you something, to buy you some time, and it gives them something to focus on. Mm-hmm. How many of you have things that, yes, I've seen some heads nodding as I've been talking. What are some things that you utilize, in working with your loved one? Does anybody want to share anything? I've seen some heads nodding back here. Do you have anything that you have used?
Well, I know that when my mother gets agitated, one of the things that I can do is, with my voice inflection, say a name of someone that is important to her.
Mm-hmm.
It's like my brother is Victor. We call him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's always how you say that there's a little connection in her
Mm-hmm.
that means something that kind of
Can divert her attention.
from what was
Okay.
going on.
Okay.
And so she'll change her directions like that.
Okay, so, and see, you know that about her, and you're able to, really utilize that. And, sometimes, for those of us who are caring for our loved ones at home, it's really important for us to know those things. But then, if there does become a point in time where, you need to place your loved one into a care facility, sharing those types of things with them. What are those things that typically soothe them? What are the names of people that might, have a calming effect on them? It's really important to make sure that that information is shared with other professional caregivers who might be, working with your loved one as well. Okay. All right. So let's look at the 4th step here. So again, reassessing and planning for the next time. Going back to detecting and connecting. So you kind of have to go back to that step 1 every time that you're, dealing with behaviors. Joining them in their reality, what went well, what didn't, and then what adjustments do you need to make for the next time. All right. All right, so we're going to look at a few behaviors and kind of talk through these. All right, so with anxiety or agitation, oftentimes you might see that, that coming out in the behaviors of restlessness or pacing, all right, distress or an over-reliance on caregivers, constantly wanting to know where the caregiver is, needing help with things, those kinds of things. That oftentimes, there's an anxiety or an agitation that is fueling that particular behavior. So I'm going to read to you a vignette, okay, about a lady named Anne. All right, I want you to listen for a few things in here. All right. Anne is a 75-year-old woman with Alzheimer's disease. She was pacing the hallways in her house in the evenings saying, "I need to go, I need to go." She would not stop walking even for her meals. Her family would give her sandwiches to eat while she was walking. Though she used a cane, she was getting blisters on her feet and had lost weight from not eating. Her family would ask Anne to sit down, but as soon as she sat down, she would immediately get back up and start pacing again. Anne had worked for 40 years as a nurse on the night shift, and her agitation began every evening. Okay? And her shoes were so worn that she appeared to be in pain as she walked. Okay? Because she always wore the same shoes, and they were kind of starting to break down a little bit. So let's think through this. All right? What do you think? What's happening with this scenario? What did you pick up on? What's the who, what, where, when, why? When is it happening? Okay, it's happening at night. You've already made a connection to her former work schedule because she was a night nurse. Okay, what else?
Thought she was going back to work.
Thought she was going back to work. Okay, she probably had a need to be productive or do something because that's the time of day that she typically did that. Okay. What do a lot of nurses do? They make rounds, all right? So they're walking a lot. They're going from room to room, all right? Do a lot of nurses have time for breaks? No. To eat? Okay. So she wasn't stopping for her meals, okay? And she had a job to do, all right? So her family was able to address a lot of those particular issues. The first thing her husband did was he didn't try to argue with her. Okay, he actually joined her in the pacing and the walking. Okay, he would start to take some snacks with him, so that as they were walking, he would offer her things so that she could, try to eat. He eventually incorporated. Once they kind of figured out that it was returning back to that former work schedule, he would ask her if she wanted to go eat in the hospital cafeteria, and they would sit down and have a sandwich, and then she would immediately get back up after she finished and get back to her duties, okay? They were able to address the shoe issue to, take care of the blisters. So they didn't try to stop the behavior, okay? They tried to join her in that behavior and make it something that was safe for her to do. So she was eating, okay? They corrected the shoe issue so that she wasn't, wearing blisters. They even gave her, a stethoscope and, a clipboard, and she was able to, jot things down. So, she was able to continue in that behavior, but she felt supported and had some tools to be productive and continue doing that, okay? So you see how making some minor changes with that and not trying to stop her from that behavior, because it really wasn't harmful to her, other than she wasn't eating, okay, and she was wearing the blisters, all right? So they really tried to understand what it was that was going on with her, okay? Okay, let's listen to Sandra real quick talk about her mother.
One of the big challenges are the personality changes that begin to manifest. And my dad thinks sometimes my mom's being difficult, or she's being very quiet and she's sitting in the room by herself. She may have done that anyway, I don't know. But I have talked to other people I know who are experiencing this, and they find that sometimes the patients exhibit very aggressive behavior, extreme agitation, fear. I think for me, fear actually makes a lot of sense, because if your brain isn't working and you don't remember things and you don't know what things are for, then how do you know the people around you will protect you from what it is you're going through?
So I think really trying to look at it from, her mother's perspective and really understand how scary that might be for her was really important for her. All right, we're going to talk about confusion or suspicion next. Has anybody dealt with this behavior with their loved one? Okay, I see a few people. All right, so let me read another vignette for you, and we're going to talk through this. When Anne's family comes to visit and evening begins, she becomes very suspicious that people are trying to get into her house and are watching her through the big picture windows. She becomes suspicious of her family for not making the people go away and that they all must be in cahoots with each other. Okay, so she's getting really, really frustrated and confused and suspicious of her family. All right, so just from reading that little bit, what can you already pick out that might be going on? What time of day is this happening? Okay, evening, all right. And we already talked about sometimes as the evening hours approach, there can be an increase in some of the behaviors that we tend to see. Is it just Anne and her spouse? Family starts to come in too, right? All right, so there are more people around, so there's an increased activity level, all right? But what was really happening in this particular situation, family would come over in the evenings, and Anne had been there all day with her caregiver with the living room curtains open, okay? And as the evening approached and it started to get dark outside, what happens to a window when it gets dark outside and you got lights on inside? It reflects like a mirror, okay? So they were leaving the curtains open, and as her family was coming in to visit with her, more people, she was seeing the reflection, okay, of her family in that picture window. And she could not process that these are the same people who were sitting here with me, all right? So she thought it was people outside the window, all right? So what they decided to do, her husband told her that he was going to go outside and talk to the people and ask them to go away, all right? And he did. He goes outside and he talks to the people, and he comes back in and tells her that they have agreed to go away, all right? And that while they're going away, they're going to go ahead and close those curtains, okay? And so they closed those, and then they were able to put up some blinds, okay, and make sure that those, that window was covered in the evening. And she was happy with that. She felt like she was supported. They had helped her solve that particular problem. They did not try to convince her, okay, of our reality, okay, and what we perceive that to be, because she felt, okay, that there were people watching her from outside, okay? And once they made that go away, then that behavior went away. She was no longer confused or suspicious about why her family was not making people go away, okay? So sometimes we have to flip it and kind of think about it differently and really look at things from the perspective of the person with dementia, all right? And her family was able to do that by getting on her level, okay? She's sitting on the sofa, and they were able to see that she was seeing that reflection. Okay, and then they were able to come up with that plan of how they were going to address that. Okay, so sometimes it's a matter of really putting yourself in the position of the person with dementia or Alzheimer's and really seeing the world from their vantage point. Okay, and really trying to understand what it is they're perceiving as reality. Okay. Okay. Let's look at aggression now. I'm going to read you another scenario here. Let me get to it. Okay, this one's kind of interesting. It's a little bit longer. All right. Anne's husband, Bill, and I think it may have said Alice on the screen before, but Anne's husband, Bill, is standing at the back of the room, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching television. Anne walks in and tells him sharply, "You're not the boss here." Bill ignores the comment and continues to watch television. Anne comes closer, raises her voice, and says, "You can't tell me what to do." When Bill doesn't respond, Anne comes up to Bill and hits him on the arm with her balled fist. Prior to her dementia symptoms, Ann was quite calm by nature and would never have exhibited this kind of behavior. Lately, her outbursts are becoming more and more frequent. She continues to come at Bill, who retreats from her and locks himself in the bathroom to avoid further conflict. He does not have a cell phone with him. Since both have been avid hunters when they were younger, there are guns in the house, but Bill has removed all of the ammunition. All right? So we're going to talk through several things with this and how Bill could have maybe responded differently to her. What did he do when she approached him the first time and the second time? He kind of ignored it, all right, which is human tendency, okay, to want to do that, all right? But ignoring her actually kind of fueled some more of her, aggressive behavior because she felt like he wasn't listening to her, okay? So some things that he could have tried was maybe to try to distract her, okay, to actually engage with her, but try to distract her with something else, whether it was something to eat, something to maybe watch on TV, whatever might work for her, okay? So he could have employed that, all right? But he didn't, and that's okay. He felt like the situation was serious enough that he retreated, into the bathroom. Now, one thing, he did not have a cell phone with him, all right? Which, I would say for all caregivers, making sure that you do have your cell phone with you and that it's charged at all times, because we all rely so much on those now, you kind of need to make sure that you always have that with you. Because as that situation escalated, he might need to call for help, okay? Somebody to come in and help him address the situation, all right? Now, with the issue of the guns in the house, although he had removed the ammunition, it's really important to remove the firearms, okay, to a location where the person with dementia or Alzheimer's cannot access those. Because what happens if the police do show up at the house, even though those guns are not loaded, okay, there's no ammunition in them, the police are not going to ask questions, right? They're going to assume that that is a loaded weapon, okay? So what we counsel caregivers is to make sure firearms are locked, okay, and out of any access. They're away from the person with dementia or Alzheimer's and they do not have access to those, all right? Because it's just really important that there's no misunderstanding with those particular things, okay? And one other thing with this particular scenario, this had been a very different behavior for Anna. It had been kind of a sharp increase in her aggressiveness. So one thing that they did was they did take her to the doctor, okay, and had some blood work done, and she did have a urinary tract infection, which, once they treated that, a lot of her aggressive behaviors did diminish, okay, and they were able to, address those medical needs, which in turn affected her behavior in a positive way, okay?
On the tough days, my husband and I would switch off. And my mom had forgotten all her English and had gone back to speaking only Greek. So she just spoke Greek, and my husband doesn't speak Greek, so it was perfect. So when she was agitated and she was cussing and yelling and saying all kinds of obnoxious things, my husband couldn't understand, so to him it didn't matter. So when she was in that mode, we'd switch off, and he'd take her for a drive, she'd stare out the window, eat fries, and she'd be fine. And it would give me a break to really decompress from some of the stuff she was saying that I know she was just saying them, their words, but I'm a human being as well, and I was taking them personally.
Okay. So she had her husband in her toolkit. She could, him and her mother, and he didn't understand what she was saying. So that worked for them. So, sometimes, you do need to rely on other people, other faces, okay, to help you, okay? In some situations, it might be necessary to call in other folks so that you can have a break also from the day in, day out, of caregiving. That's important as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about repetition. Those of you who are caring for your loved ones, this is probably something that you have encountered. Repetitive questions, things like that. That's oftentimes some of the first behaviors or symptoms that we start to notice is some repetition with things. So let's look at another vignette. All right, this is Anne again. She has recently been concerned about an upcoming visit from her daughter. Though her daughter Katie is not scheduled to visit for another 2 weeks, she's begun to repeatedly ask her husband Bill when Katie will arrive. Anne asks several times throughout the day, every day, which has begun to wear on Bill. He finds himself answering her impatiently or even ignoring some of Anne's questions. At the same time, Anne is going into the bathroom much more frequently than she ever has before, every 10 to 20 minutes. Okay, so what do you think might be going on here with Anne?
UTI.
Okay, UTI. All right, because that's one of the symptoms is frequent urination. All right, so they did take her to the doctor. She did have a urinary tract infection. What are some ways that he could address this particular issue? What are some things that come to mind? She's asking repeatedly, several times a day. The behavior, is starting to wear on him. The visit's not supposed to happen for another 2 weeks. So what is one strategy that you can think of?
What about doing a little paper calendar and letting her mark off each day and work it, see if it worked that way?
Perfect, yeah, and that's exactly what he did. All right, so he did a little, 2-week calendar that kind of said, today, and then it said, their daughter's visit, Katie's visit, and then she was able to mark off the days, okay? They actually had to tape that to the kitchen counter, all right, because things would walk away and get misplaced. So he wanted to make sure that it was there every day for her in the same location. So that he was able to, lessen some of the questions about the visit, all right?
Maybe not tell her as early.
That's another good strategy for the future, is maybe not announce the visits quite so early in advance, because it really does create kind of that questioning, okay? Other things that you can do is, kind of put them in mode of preparing for the visit and doing things to kind of get ready for it. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say that, and what about FaceTiming?
Okay.
And saying, I'm going to be there in 10 days, and will this, and be ready.
And I think that's great. And we have that kind of technology now where people can be, connected visually. And if that works for your loved one, fantastic. That's another tool in the toolbox that, you'd be able to use. So all those are great ideas, because really, it's a matter of just managing that time between now and when Katie's going to visit, and how you're going to fill that time and kind of give her some ways to remember when that visit's going to take place. Okay, so those are all great things. Yes, ma'am.
It's interesting because you can see the different stages of the disease progression. Because this works well in the earlier stages, but then you get to the point like marking an X. She doesn't process what that is. And even if you did it, it would still 30 seconds later, it's not there.
You're right.
And so, for me, something like that is more deflection,
Yeah.
distraction.
And you might have to, rely more on diverting attention, kind of away from those things and distracting, away from kind of focusing, on that kind of thing. And I think you're right. As folks, move, through the various stages of the disease, and their abilities start to, decline. Like she said, at a certain point, she might not be able to make the X, on the calendar, or to connect what that means, that means days. So you might have to move to different things as people, progress through it. Okay. And I know last week you talked about the different stages, early, middle, and late stage, and different ways to communicate. And as people move into, the later stages, it really becomes more, about detecting what their behavioral messages mean, but then you communicating with them and making sure that you're continuing, to do that, and then relying on those 5 senses that they talked about last week. Middle stage is typically where you start to see a lot of the, abilities start to decline, and you may have to change your approaches, as you, move through that. Because folks who are in the earlier part of the middle stages of the disease, different things may work still at that point. But then as they get, farther into middle or early later stage, you might not be able to use those same approaches. So thank you for bringing that up.
Repetition is really one of the most common and also frustrating behaviors for caregivers. It's important to really just take a minute, take a breath, and really think about how you could help that person with the answer that they're looking for. It really makes no sense to sort of bump heads with them and try to correct them or try to tell them to stop asking it, because they really can't remember that they just asked you that a minute ago. So thinking about how you could provide an answer that's reassuring, even though you might be doing it over and over and over again.
And one of the things that he said was, providing an answer that's reassuring for them. Because oftentimes with repetition, repetitive questions, that's what they're looking for. Okay, they're looking for reassurance. Okay, whether it's an answer to their question, or knowing that somebody's there, or knowing what's going to happen next. Okay, so that's really what, a lot of times is fueling those repetitive questions like that. All right, let's talk a little bit about wandering. The slide that you see here, obviously it says 60% of people with dementia will wander, and it can really happen at any stage without warning, all right? And I think in our own local community, we have seen, obviously, the news story several weeks ago about the gentleman that wandered and was missing for several days, weeks. And this is a problem, all right? So, ways that you can deal with this particular behavior. Looking at those 4 steps, detecting and connecting, all right? So trying to understand, what is happening when they are prone to this particular behavior, okay? You'll often hear the expression, I want to go home, I want to go home. So again, focusing on the feelings rather than the facts, okay? They may be remembering a home 30, 40 years ago in the past or more, all right? So, what is it that they're trying, what is it that they're seeking, okay? Are they seeking the reassurance and the love and support of the people who were there? Okay, are they remembering the house, the farm, different aspects of it? So what can you do to divert attention and get them perhaps talking about home, telling you about home, the people who were there, what it meant to them, okay? And just making sure that they know that you're there and you're reassuring, you're a reassuring presence, for them. Some of the, actual nuts and bolts, the physical aspects of preventing wandering, and how many of you have dealt with or are dealing with this particular issue right now? Okay, I've got one in the back. And some of the things that you can do, are making sure that all of the entry and exit points to the home are secured, okay, locked with deadbolt locks, all right? Sometimes moving locks to either a higher location or a lower location, all right? Because of some of the visual acuity declines, they're going to be zeroing in kind of eye level, all right? So sometimes changing where the actual locks are. Installing alarms, various places, throughout your home, motion sensor alarms, so that if they are approaching an exit, you'll be alerted to that. Oftentimes folks will put those on bedroom doors, okay, so that if someone exits the bedroom, especially at night, that alarm is going to go off and alert the caregiver that this person is on the move, okay? Some other things to think about, sometimes, and this will sound really simplistic, Sometimes just putting a simple stop sign on the door is enough to deter some folks. Because, we're all used to seeing that red octagonal symbol and the word stop, okay? So sometimes, just putting that there is enough, all right? Painting the door and the wall, all right, the same color, okay? So that it's not as visible that this is a door. There do become issues with depth perception as folks move through the diagnosis, and sometimes putting darker colored rugs in front of the door can act as a deterrent, because to them that looks like, it actually looks like a hole, okay, in front of the door, okay, and they'll be less likely to approach, okay. The door covers, the kind that you use for toddlers. I remember when my son he tried to get into everything, so I had those all over every door. But sometimes that's a simple deterrent, okay, for folks not being able to exit. Other things that we do recommend, okay, we have a Medic Alert Safe Return program, which is an identification program that you can sign your loved one up for. It's a piece of jewelry, basically, that they wear. It's a bracelet or a necklace that has an ID number on it, okay? So that if they do wander, all right, there's an 800 number on the back of it. It's got their ID. They can be connected back with local law enforcement in their area and with you, the caregiver, okay? So it just helps that process if someone intercepts them, if they have wandered, to help reconnect them as quickly as possible. There are some other things, on the market now. If your loved one is still at a point where they're using a cell phone, okay, they have one, using tracking devices, apps on that cell phone is helpful. There are some other GPS tracking devices that are wearable technology that you can get for the person. I've even heard about a new app recently called the Tile app. Is anybody in here familiar? You're familiar with that? I think that one's only like a 500-foot radius or something like that, so it's really close, but it at least would let you know around your home, if somebody is, on the move, like that. A lot of times they use it for kids to make sure they
I got one in my wallet, so I'll try to look for it. I got a towel clip in my wallet.
Okay, all right, so you're using it to help you find your wallet. Okay, I got it.
Try to remember where the hell I laid it.
I got it. Now, if you lose your cell phone, then you're...
Well, got one for my iPad too.
Oh, did you? Okay.
He can't find his socks either.
It's springtime.
Oh, too funny. But there are a lot of different, ways and devices out there now to, help you in, tracking, for lack of a better word, your loved one, and to have identification, with them. Other questions about wandering?
I
Yes,
know
sir.
when you were talking about locks, friend of mine, I didn't have trouble with my mother, but he had problems with his mother. And she would eventually, no matter what kind of lock you put on there, she'd eventually figure it out.
Figure it out.
So he decided to put the lock up at the top of the door where she couldn't reach it, and didn't have any problem.
Yeah. Yeah, but sometimes it's as simple as that, because, oftentimes, folks with dementia or Alzheimer's can be some of the most motivated individuals to figure things out. Some of you are shaking your heads. So not uncommon that she figured out, a lot of those locks. But again, moving it out of reach, out of eye level, was something that worked for them. Other things, other questions about wandering, or about anything that we've talked about today. Let's open it up for questions now. Yes, ma'am.
Question about when they say they want to go home, sometimes they're thinking about their parents who have passed away, and they're referring, to that.
Mm-hmm. That is true. Oftentimes when folks are saying they want to go home, they're actually referring to parents or other loved ones, in their past. So, maybe getting them, talking about that. Or if you've got access to old photo albums, maybe bringing those out and getting them looking at maybe photos and telling you stories about, and just kind of redirecting, their energy to telling you what that was like and who those loved ones were becomes, something that you can use. What else? Other questions about anything we've talked about today? Yes, sir.
The gentleman that locked himself in the bathroom, was that a little dangerous, leaving her out there by herself with?
Yeah, I mean, it probably wasn't the wisest thing for him to do, but he felt threatened at that point, and we just had a snippet, of that, dynamic, but
And he had to know the person too.
Yeah, and I mean, not the smartest thing, especially not having a cell phone, because he wasn't able to call, for help in that particular situation. So him learning different ways to diffuse that situation so that he didn't have to retreat would be key for him. Yes, sir.
I do recitation programs running at the retirement home, and I have learned to relate more with them. I used to wear dress shirts and a tie. I wear golf shirts now. They're more relaxed. Well, I was out at Oak Creek Village at Thornblade one day. Ms. Gross was the activities director. And she asked me would I go over to Pleasantburg, which that's the building they call for the Alzheimer's and
the memory care.
And I knew nothing about Alzheimer's whatsoever. So she said, would you mind doing 10 or 15 minutes? I said, sure. And this lady just stared at me the whole time I was doing it. And when I got ready to walk out, she stuck a hand out. Well, she was sitting like this. That's a defensive kind of look, and I thought, oh boy, she's going to chew me alive. Well, she stuck a hand out, and I said, ma'am, my hands are cold. She said, cold hands, warm heart. I said, stinky feet, no sweetheart. She laughed. I want you to know, we just sat there and laughed, and she had beautiful gray hair. And I said, dream girl, beautiful luster cream girl, you owe your crowning glory to a luster cream shampoo.
I bet she knew that, didn't she?
She said I used to use it, and when we got outside, Ms. Grove said, I don't know what you did, but that lady hadn't spoken to anyone in 2 or 3 days, and you got her laughing, and she's walking like a teenager. And that was a change.
I think that's a wonderful point to make, is that oftentimes humor, is a great way to disarm behaviors, especially frustration or agitation. If you can figure out some way to disarm through humor, may not work all the time, but to remember to laugh, with your loved one. And you must know a lot of songs and different little jingles.
I do. I can recite over 1,400 lines of poetry from memory, and I do 1930, 1940 radio commercials for them. And it takes them back. Lemon Abner, the whole thing.
Yeah, so that's a way to connect with somebody that they're going to, oftentimes probably recognize those things, and it can distract their attention away from whatever it is they're fixated on. So that's a great story. Music is a great way, and y'all probably talked about that last week in the communication. Music memory, all right, and our sense of rhythm is actually some of our most first formed memories, all right? Because if you think about it, we're in the womb for 9 months, and what do we hear when we're in there? We hear the heartbeat, from our mother. What happens when we're born? We're barraged with music everywhere, lullabies, little sing-along things. So music is just kind of, very deep in the brain. So oftentimes folks you'll see a spark when you utilize music, especially for folks even into the later stages. Music is a great way to connect, because you might not be able to see, sparks of connection, but you start some music from their era or hymns or things that they really loved, and you'll see, sparks of connection. So that's a great thing.
A friend of mine's a music therapist. She goes to many of the Alzheimer's caregivers, does music therapy, and she had to learn the older songs.
Yeah, so that's a great way, to connect with folks. Yes, sir.
I wanted to share one with you. You mentioned earlier about a lady that was having trouble eating. In my mother's later years, she was in Myrtle Beach, and I had a person taking care of her, but we'd go down once a month, spend the weekend, and let the helper have a day off, a day or two off. Fix breakfast and put a plate of breakfast food in front of her, and she'd take about 2 bites, and I'd say, Mom, you not eating? Oh, no, I'm full. I said, okay. I'd take the plate, walk away from the table, wander around the kitchen for about 30 seconds, come back and say, Mom, here's your breakfast. Oh, thank you. It would take about 10 or 15 trips like that, and she would finally eat a full breakfast plate.
Yeah.
It's another way to look
That
at
is
it.
a great, tool, and it becomes comical a little bit because you're repeating the same thing, but for her, it was new every
She
time,
didn't
and
know
you're
she
able to
brought
get.
breakfast. She was eating breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. You're able to get a few more bites in her each time, so that, is extremely helpful, just to reapproach with things like that.
I had with my mother, I had a bad problem with the accusatory stage.
Mhm.
She grew up in Italy during the war, and she was used to hiding.
Mm.
And she started accusing my wife of stealing the money. And here we found out she was hiding it, especially after she passed away. She found money everywhere. And she was to the point where she was going to call me. I had to watch it. She didn't get close to a phone, but she was going to call the police. Yeah, and I kind of reasoned with her finally and had a talk with her and explained to her, what she was doing, and you could see it. It wasn't kind of clicking in her mind, but after that, I didn't seem to have as much problem.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, especially if they're misplacing the items and they're continually, accusing loved ones of that. So that's one of the most frustrating, ones to deal with. Sometimes with things like that, money, it might be a little harder, but with items that they're accusing people of misplacing or stealing from them, having multiple ones of those things so that you can pull out another one if one goes missing, that sometimes is a helpful thing. With money, that'd be a little hard, But it was good that you knew that about her, though, that she was used to, hiding things just from the era that she lived in.
She hid it under her jewelry, she hid it in books, everything.
Yeah. I think I saw another hand back here. Yes, ma'am.
As a musician, it's my understanding that music for anybody and everybody tends to send more higher tones in different parts of the brain all the time. Would it be beneficial to have music playing more often?
It could be, and that's kind of an individual thing. It's certainly something to try. Some of the soothing music or music that they may recognize, like the old jingles or the songs, from their particular, era. Making sure that they're at a volume that's, works for them, not too loud. It's kind of like, Goldilocks, not too loud, not too soft, and kind of figuring out the sweet spot there with that. But yes, most definitely that could be something, especially if, if you've got someone who is experiencing some frustration or anxiety or agitation at that moment, maybe turning on some background music and seeing if that's something that might, resonate with them, and help to soothe them. So that's certainly something to try.
And just on a total personal note, I guess I saw a movie where somebody had a final, end-of-life playlist. I hope to do that.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. All right, I haven't heard that concept, but I like that idea. That's wow. That's interesting. All right, I saw another hand back here. Yes, ma'am.
I found that the music portion is about 20 to 30 minutes left at our house right now.
Okay.
That could change. It can change any day.
Yeah.
But quiet music works. Mozart works wonderful.
Okay.
I use a lot of hymns. There are a lot of CDs, something about hymns of the past.
And oftentimes those are songs that we connect
songs
with.
that he knows.
Yeah.
Songs that I know.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. And it's good that you've zeroed in on about 20 to 30 minutes right now is what works, for you. And you brought up a really good point. I think this kind of brings us back to the beginning, is that every day it could be different, okay? What works one day or works for 2 weeks might not work in the future, all right? But you have to keep reassessing, okay, and figuring out what works. And again, just to reiterate what I said in the beginning, oftentimes, people want a prescription. Let me do X, Y, Z, and it's going to, curb this behavior. but people are so individualized, and the way that the disease progresses in each individual is so individualized that it really is a connecting experience and figuring out what works between you and your loved one that you're caring for. Okay? Another thing that I did want to mention when we talk about behaviors is addressing those medical needs. And we always want to, whenever there are behaviors that come to the forefront, especially the ones that we talked about today, is really looking at non-pharmacological interventions first. Okay. Oftentimes, when behaviors start to increase, folks want to go to the doctor and get a pill that is going to make this better. Okay. And, we advocate that, you try non-pharmacological interventions first, okay? That's not to say that there might not be symptoms for which, there are drugs that could help, all right? Especially if there are symptoms of mood disturbances or depression or things like that, difficulty sleeping. Those are things that most definitely a physician could work with you to try to find the right medications for those. But the things that we're talking about today, the anxiety and the agitation, the wandering, the confusion, the suspicion, there are oftentimes other things that are fueling that, the emotions or the environment. And you really need to look at how you can control those types of things first, and what are the things that you can try before you look to any type of pharmaceutical intervention. Okay. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have found that essential oils will calm Bill down
Okay.
when he gets really agitated.
Okay.
And I use essential oils and rub it on his back.
I'm going to ask him. They're asking what kinds do you use?
The first time, I went to Garner's in the doTERRA, and I was reached the point that I was ready to pay $100 for a little bottle of frankincense, and the gentleman said, "Why don't you try this?" And it was $26, and it's called Balance by doTERRA.
Okay.
And,
so that's another thing that you have in your toolbox that works are the essential oils, and oftentimes that can help, especially if somebody is very sensitive.
And it really, it does even out, balance out everything.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. It's a good tip.
In reference to what she said, I have a friend who's a caregiver, and she is using lavender on a hanky, and kind of puts it on her pillow at night to kind of help her to sleep.
I actually do that myself. So I dab my pillow with lavender before I go to sleep at night. It does help. Yeah. So I think there is some benefit to that, and exploring that, as a possible, option in dealing with some of the behaviors. A couple things I wanted to mention. We do have a brochure up here at the front. If you want to pick up one of these, this is on the behaviors that we talked about today. So if you want to pick that up on your way out. And then there's an agency called Absolute Total Care, which provided these caregiver journals for all of you. And this has some really good information in it, good sections to help you think through caregiving issues, and then also how to take care of yourself, okay, if you're caring for your loved one. It gives you some ideas and some tips to deal with stress and to keep yourself as healthy as possible. So don't forget to pick up one of these as well. And then also, I do have a sign-in sheet that I forgot to ask you at the beginning, so if you wouldn't mind stopping by here and jotting your name down, I would appreciate that very much. And I'll take one more round of questions if there are any, and if not, we will wrap up. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it may not be about behavior, but it's a phase that we're in now, and I've heard it referred to as the loop phase. So she hums nonstop. She'll hum while she's eating. She hums. She's even getting to the point where she tries to walk, but her eyes are closed, but she's humming. It's constant
Mm-hmm.
humming. And I know it's kind of stuck in this loop, but just leaving it alone. But what happens next? What happens? Is this something that's going to be? I mean, I know you can't answer that, but other people may have.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure about the progression of that, if it just kind of maintains and stays at that particular level. I'm certainly familiar with, that kind of looping, that does happen like that. But I think it's, it's individual, as far as kind of what happens, with that. Is there any kind of frustration or anxiety that's fueling it that you can see, or is it just a self-soothing kind of
It's like
thing?
a habit type thing,
Okay.
like where you rub
Yeah.
or you scratch or whatever like that. You keep coming back. But fortunately, she's happy, and it's wonderful music. And we do put the CDs on at night when she goes to sleep, and she
Okay.
knows that there's a certain CD that track number 9 skips, and don't play track number 9.
So she knows that, she zeroed in on that. But I was going to say maybe trying to match up some music, with the humming, just to kind of, because it oftentimes that kind of looping is a self-soothing kind of thing. So, I just, as long as it's
It's
not.
all good. It's all good.
I mentioned to you about
Yes,
the
sir.
book, The 36-Hour Day.
Yes.
That is an excellent book. I'm reading that now, and it gives you every possible situation that you could be in and things you should do. You catch yourself analyzing yourself also. Yeah, you say, I do that, there it is.
Yeah,
That
I'm seeing
is
a lot
an
of heads
excellent
shaking.
book.
This was one of the first, comprehensive books written about the disease 30 or more years ago, and we still recommend it today because it's just got a lot of really good information. It's a daunting book to sit down and read through cover to cover. So what we typically recommend is get the book and just have it as a resource. Consult the sections that you need when you need them. Okay. Some people may enjoy reading it cover to cover, but just know that this is here, and it does delve into every conceivable topic related to caring for someone. Yes, ma'am.
That just brought to mind, as most people here know, I'm Dan Yankee from Massachusetts. And I worked for my dad in the auto repair business. And one of our customers was a well-known, well-thought-of doctor in Springfield. And his daughter has written a wonderful book on caring for her mother when her mother developed. I can't even think of the name of it, but I will check it out when I get home. And if anybody wants the name of the book, I will be glad to pass it on to them.
Okay, that's great.
And of course, I was personally interested in it because I knew the people.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a very well-written book.
And I think that's a great resource, so however y'all connect things like that here and do that, that would be great. One thing I did want to mention, for those of you who are caring for loved ones, we do have a number of caregiver support groups that do meet throughout Greenville County. Actually, we cover 12 counties out of the Greenville office, so we've got support groups that meet in all counties in the upstate. And they meet different days of the week, different times of the day, so that it's convenient for folks. And those are an invaluable means of informal support because you're meeting with other caregivers who get it. They just instantly understand what your day is like and what caring for someone, with Alzheimer's or dementia is like. So I do encourage you, if you're not connected with a support group, certainly get in touch with us and we can, provide that list for you because there is help out there and there are connections out there that you can make with other caregivers to share information like what you just shared. Yes, ma'am. No. Okay.
Just one more thing, and most people may have already be familiar with this, but the book Still Alice is also highly recommended by the Alzheimer's Association.
Yes, it is.
And when I first came in touch with that was when we really knew Mom, the things were going on. But it explained so much from the perspective of the person going through it, such as the depth perception, why and how, and so forth like that. So if anybody hasn't read it, I would highly recommend reading it. Not the movie, the book, Still Alice.
I recommend the book too. So the book's Still Alice. Some of you have probably heard of that. It is a good first person, account of what it's like to be diagnosed with the disease and kind of progress through some of the stages. So, all right. I'll be here for another few minutes. I do have my business card if anybody, would like that and needs more information. And if you've got other questions I'll be around for a little while after the presentation. But thank you so much. This has been a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to share information with you. And I do hope that, if you do have needs or concerns or questions, that you will reach out to us or point others, in our direction as well, because we're here to help you and support you. Okay? Thank you.